Hey guys, I'm going to jump in now for this tax tutorial video and try and kind of break down the formula and the in-game tax to make it as painless and kind of easy to understand as possible. So yeah, the first few points, like you would have seen at the beginning of the video, tax is only going to be on certain playfields, a planet, maybe an orbit. It's only going to be mainly permanent safe places that aren't starter planets. You know, a little bit of a luxury to live there. And also places, not many, I think only one for example at the moment, but a place maybe where it's a hub of PvP activity, so where there's a lot of people wanting to fight. We're just thinking about performance, so again there will be tax in some areas for example like that, but all the information will be kept in the HWS guide, so do check that out. So the formula itself for the tax is the structure devices times 1,000 divided by the reputation, and then whether if it's private, that's where the calculation the formula will stop. If you're in a faction and it's a faction structure, then you will also divide that by the faction members. So just to break down the structure devices, it doesn't make a difference whether it's a base, a CV or an SV. It's just the total amount of devices that structure has. It's times by 1,000. The 1,000 is just it's just a number, so you don't need to worry about that. It's just a way for us to make the outcome be kind of realistic. The reputation, if it's your private structure, it will just be your reputation that you have as an individual. Even if you're part of a faction, if you set a structure to your private, so it's just under you, no, your faction members can't access it, it will just go off your reputation. And if it's a faction structure, then the reputation will be the combined reputation that every single member has. So yeah, that's kind of how the reputation works. And divided by faction members is how the total number of members within the faction, regardless of whether they're active or not. If they're listed as part of that faction, that's the number that it would be divided by. So just an example now, the 455 devices, let's just say I have a base and it's set to a faction. So we have a faction base. It's got 455 devices, we times that by 1,000, and then it's divided by the total reputation. Now let's just say I have 50 reputation and the rest of the other 3 members in my faction have got, between them they have 50 reputation. So that's where the hundreds come from. We divide that by 4 because that's how many people are in our faction, including myself, so myself and 3 others. So what that would mean for that one structure in that taxable playfield, it means that every player within the faction, those 4 people, will pay 1,138 each. So that number is the same for all of you. An example for the private tax, so this is a structure just set to your private, the base, same example, the base 455 devices times 1,000 divided by your own individual reputation, which is 50, and that's 9,100, and that's only you will pay that. Okay, so now moving on to where things get a little bit more complicated, and it's if you have over one structure on a taxable playfield or area. So it's to control overpopulation. So again, thinking about performance, we charge it an additional 30% for any structure over 1 in a taxable area. So an example would be we have the base set to faction. So we have a faction base like in the previous one, 455 times 1,000, blah blah blah, it gives you the 1,138. Now, if we have an SV as well, set to faction sat right next to it, then you add an additional 30% onto the base, which gives you an extra 341, and then you also get an additional 30% for the SV. So the SV, we're saying, has got 245 devices times by the 1,000 divided by the same reputation, obviously it's faction and the same numbers. It gives you 1,000 because the minimum amount of tax is 1,000. So if it's going to be under that, you're still going to pay 1,000 as a bare minimum. Adding the 30% is obviously an extra 300. So the extra bill will be the 30%, which is an extra 641. So the total tax to be paid will be 2,779 per player. So yeah, it's not the faction leader. That is per player that would pay that. And again, if it's private faction, then it will be just taken away, changing the reputation and taking off the last bit, and then obviously working out. But the principle's there. It's an extra 30% per structure for any structure over one. One other thing just to note is that private and faction are separate. So if you have a private base on a taxable playfield and you have a faction base, so you have a private base and a faction base on the same taxable playfield, that will still only count as one structure, because obviously one's for you and one's for your faction. If you add another private, or if you add another faction, SV, CV, etc., then that's when the additional 30% will come on. So yeah, now we're going to move on to looking at how to manage it in game and whatnot. Just jumping in game now, just to show you a few easier ways of how to manage the tax in game. So with the new registry feature, you can of course keep track of any structures and all structures throughout the universe that you have set to private or to faction. So straight away, it's an easy way to see whether or not you've got a structure in a taxable playfield, and if you have, you can toggle whether it's a faction one or whether it's private. You have different options at the top to see if you want to just show an SV. If you think, for example, you've got an SV somewhere that's taxable, you can just toggle at the top to show that. But yeah, it's a nice in-game feature that Empyrion have added, that it does actually help out with the tax along with a lot of other things. So that's kind of like your first protocol to make sure that your tax does marry up with that. Stepping on to the HWS now, where the HWS Connect, where you see the bulk of all the features and information. Click on the Connect here and you'll see all the information about the tax that's kind of important. So in the first tab here, we got its faction or private, so whether or not the structure is set to your faction, which my faction in this case is tax, or if it's just a private structure, which will just show your name, as mine there, Achilles. It shows you your faction reputation, or your reputation. So if it's set to private, obviously it will show your reputation, or faction, it will show the total amount of all your members. The next one is your bank account, so you know how much money you've got. And the one along is just the credits on you. So the next one along is the playfield. So it will only be taxable playfields that pop up there. So you should, if you checked out the guide, you should be aware of that. The faction members, how many members you've got in the faction. It's only myself in that faction, but that will change depending on how many people you've got. Then you've got the structure name, which you've seen before, the structure ID, and the devices on that. Now, the last one is just the actual tax you're going to pay. And then to make things nice and easy, if you just want to know, end of the day, how much you're paying, boom, right there, that's exactly how much tax I will be due to pay if I left all those structures there. So yeah guys, that's kind of it for the tax. Hopefully it hasn't been too painful. Just a couple of important notes here to kind of take in, but other than that, thanks for watching.